You know that feeling when you're alone in a place that should feel safe, but every shadow seems to breathe with malevolent life? That's what working night security at Riverside Elementary taught me. The building was old, built back in 1953, and it held secrets in its bones that no amount of fresh paint or new carpeting could cover up. I started working there 3 years ago when I needed the money. Single dad, bills to pay, you know how it is. The job seemed perfect at first. You know how it is. The job seemed perfect at first. Walk the halls, check the doors, make sure nobody breaks in. Easy money for 8 hours of basically nothing. The principal, Mrs. Henderson, gave me the tour on my first day, showing me the alarm system, the keys, where to call if something happened. She mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that some guards had quit without notice. Said they found the building unsettling at night. I laughed it off. I'd worked construction, dealt with drunk idiots at bars. What could scare me about an empty school? The first month was exactly what I expected. Quiet hallways, the occasional settling noise, nothing more dramatic than a mouse scurrying across the cafeteria floor. I'd walk my rounds every 2 hours, checking classrooms, making sure windows were secure. The silence felt peaceful, almost meditative. I'd bring a book, sometimes doze in the security office chair. The fluorescent lights hummed their steady electric lullaby, and the heating system clicked and groaned in its familiar rhythm. It was the easiest job I'd ever had. But schools, especially old ones, have a way of holding on to things. Memories, emotions, sometimes worse things than that. It started small, so small I almost missed it entirely. Room 23, Mrs. Patterson's second grade classroom, always felt colder than the rest of the building. Not just cool, but cold, a way that made your breath visible even when the heating was working perfectly. The air itself felt thick there, heavy with something I couldn't name. I'd check the thermostat, and it always read the same as every other room, but stepping into 23 was like walking into a meat locker. My skin would prickle with goosebumps, and I'd find myself backing out quickly, making excuses about why that room could wait until tomorrow. Then there were the sounds. At first, I assumed it was the building settling, pipes expanding and contracting. But the noises had a rhythm to them, almost like footsteps. Light, quick steps, like a child running down the hallway. But when I'd follow the sound, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, I'd find nothing. Just empty corridors and closed classroom doors. The sound would stop the moment I turned toward it, as if whatever made it knew I was listening. Sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in standing water, mixed with something else. Chalk dust, old paper. And underneath it all, something organic and wrong, like milk that had turned sour. It would drift through the hallways at random times, strong enough to make my eyes water, then vanish completely when I tried to track down its source. The worst part was room 15. It was at the end of the east wing, supposedly unused for storage. The door was always locked, painted over so many times that the layers looked thick as frosting. But sometimes, when I walked past her in my rounds, I could swear I heard whispers coming from inside. Not words I could make out, just the soft murmur of voices, like children having a secret conversation. The sound would seep through the heavy wood like water through cracks. When I asked Mrs. Henderson about it, her face went pale and she simply said it wasn't part of my responsibilities. Her hand trembled slightly when she said it, and she wouldn't meet my eyes. 3 months into the job, things escalated. I was doing my midnight round when I heard it clearly for the first time. The sound of children laughing. Not the joyful laughter of recess or birthday parties, but something hollow and echoing, like the sound was coming from very far away or very long ago. It seemed to drift through the walls themselves, following me as I walked. The laughter had an edge to it, a knowing quality that made my skin crawl. Every time I stopped to listen more carefully, it would fade, leaving only the oppressive silence that felt heavier than any sound. That same night, I found the first drawing. It was taped to the inside of the main entrance door, where I couldn't have missed it during my earlier rounds. A crude crayon drawing that looked like a child's work, but the subject matter made my skin crawl. It showed a stick figure man with X's for eyes, surrounded by smaller figures with sharp pointed teeth and too many fingers on their hands. The children in the drawing had faces that were wrong somehow, features that didn't quite line up the way they should. At the bottom, in shaky letters that seemed to have been written by a trembling hand, someone had written, "He sees you as." The paper felt old and brittle, like it had been there for years, but I knew it hadn't been there an hour before years, but I knew it hadn't been there an hour before. The drawings kept appearing. On classroom whiteboards, taped to lockers, even ones plastered across the mirrors in the teacher's bathroom. Always the same theme, A man surrounded by threatening children with too many teeth and eyes that seemed to stare right through the paper. And always that message, he sees you as, or we see him, or sometimes just soon. The crayon marks looked fresh each time, waxy and bright, as if a child had just finished coloring them. Waxy and bright, as if a child had just finished coloring them. I started carrying a camera to document them, but the photos never came out right. The images were always blurred, as if something was moving too fast for the camera to capture, or as if the drawings themselves were resisting being recorded. The janitor's closet on the second floor became another problem. Every night, without fail, I'd find it standing open, cleaning supplies scattered across the floor. Bottles of bleach would be uncapped, their harsh chemical smell burning my nostrils. Mop buckets would be overturned, dirty water spreading across the tiles in patterns that almost looked like words if you squinted in the right light. I'd clean it up, lock the door, check it twice, but by morning it would be open again, contents strewn about like a child had been playing inside. Then I started seeing them. The children. At first, just glimpses in my peripheral vision. A small figure ducking around a corner. A face pressed against the classroom window for just a moment before vanishing. I chased after them, but there was never anyone there. Just the lingering smell of chalk dust and something else. Something sweet and sickly that reminded me of playground scraped knees and band-aids that had been left on too long. The security cameras were useless. They'd show me walking the empty hallways alone, but I swear I could feel eyes on me, watching from every shadow. During my rounds, I'd hear whispers following me, staying just at the edge of hearing. Sometimes the voices sounded like they were coming from inside the walls themselves, or from the ceiling tiles above my head. They'd call my name in high, childish voices, drawing out the syllables like they were playing a game. "Mark, Wayark," they'd whisper. "Mark, come play with us." I started wearing headphones to block them out, but even through the music, I could still hear them calling. "What misses the ceiling tiles?" Morlau was quoting. Henderson noticed I looked tired, asked if everything was alright during my shifts. I wanted to tell her about the drawings, the voices, the children I kept seeing, but how do you explain something like that without sounding crazy? Instead, I just said I was having trouble sleeping during the day. She nodded sympathetically and suggested I might want to find a different job if night work wasn't agreeing with me. But there was something in her eyes, a knowing look that made me think she wasn't as surprised as she pretended to be. But I couldn't quit, not yet, because I was starting to understand that whatever was happening in that school wasn't just random supernatural activity. The children I was seeing, they weren't malevolent spirits trying to harm me. They were trying to warn me about something. The man in the drawings, the figure with X's for eyes, I was beginning to realize. The figure with X's for eyes, I was beginning to realize that was meant to be me. They were showing me my future. What would happen if I didn't figure out what they were trying to tell me? The temperature drops became more frequent and more severe. I'd be walking down a perfectly normal hallway when suddenly the air would turn arctic, cold enough that I could see my breath in thick clouds. My flashlight beam would seem dimmer somehow, as if the cold was absorbing the light itself. During these moments, the whispers would grow louder, more urgent. Sometimes I could almost make out words. Danger, basement, they heard us. The cold would follow me for several minutes before gradually warming back to normal, leaving me shivering and confused. The revelation came on a Thursday night in October. The school felt different that evening, charged with an electrical tension that made my hair stand on end. The usual sounds seemed muffled, as if I were underwater, and shadows appeared darker and more solid than they should have been. I was in the basement checking the boiler when I heard footsteps directly above me. Not the light patter of children, but heavy, deliberate steps. Adult footsteps. Someone was in the building, and it wasn't supposed to be me alone. I grabbed my radio and tried to call it in, but all I got was static. My phone had no signal, the screen flickering weakly before going dark completely. The footsteps moved slowly down the main hallway, pausing at classroom doors, stopping at classroom doors, stopping at what sounded like room 15. I could hear the old lock turning, metal grinding against metal, and then the creak of hinges that hadn't been oiled in years. I crept upstairs, every instinct screaming at me to call for backup, but with no communication I was on my own. The hallway was darker than usual, as if the shadows had grown thicker and more substantial. The footsteps had stopped, but I could see light seeping out from under the door of room 15, the forbidden storage room that was supposed to be permanently locked. As I got closer, I could hear voices inside. Adult voices this time, speaking in hushed tones that carried the weight of terrible secrets. I pressed my ear to the door and felt my blood turn to ice water in my veins. They were talking about the children, about how easy it was to get them to trust you when you worked at the school. You had access after hours. About places to hide things where no one would ever look. About how the basement tunnels connected to other buildings, other schools. About how the previous security guards had asked too many questions. The phantom children hadn't been trying to scare me. They'd been trying to protect me, to warn me about the real monsters that used this place for their unspeakable purposes. The drawings weren't threats, they were evidence, desperate attempts by trapped souls to communicate the horror they'd experienced. The man with X's for eyes wasn't death coming for me. It was what I'd become if I discovered their secret, and they decided I knew too much. I backed away from the door slowly, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it through the wood. But the old floorboards betrayed me with a long, agonizing creak that echoed down the empty hallway like a gunshot. The voices inside stopped immediately. I heard the scrape of chairs being pushed back, heavy footsteps moving toward the door. Not walked quickly, not crept away. I ran like my life depended on it, because it probably did. My feet pounded against the linoleum, slipping slightly on the wax surface. Behind me, I could hear the door to room 15 bang open and voices calling out, adult voices filled with anger and panic. I crashed through the main entrance, not bothering to lock anything behind me, and sprinted to my car. My hands shook so violently I could barely get the keys into the ignition. I drove straight to the police station, babbling about voices and locked rooms and things I'd seen. The officers were skeptical at first, but something in my voice must have convinced them to check it out. When they searched room 15, they found evidence of things that made the local news for weeks. Things I won't repeat here because some horrors are too real to use for entertainment. They never caught the men I heard that night. By the time the police arrived, the room was empty except for what they left behind. But the children stopped appearing after that. No more drawings, no more whispers, no more cold spots or phantom footsteps. The school felt normal again, if a school can ever truly feel normal after you know what happened in its shadows. I never worked security again. Couldn't handle the isolation, to not knowing what might be lurking in the quiet spaces. But sometimes, late at night when I'm lying in bed, I still hear them. The children who tried to warn me, tried to protect me from becoming another victim. And I wonder if there are others out there, working night shifts in empty buildings, seeing things they can't explain, not realizing that sometimes the dead are trying to save the living from horrors that are all too real. If you work alone at night, in places where children spend their days, pay attention to the things that seem impossible. Listen to the voices that shouldn't be there. Because sometimes, the supernatural isn't the thing you should be afraid of. Sometimes, it's trying to save you from something much worse. The building was demolished 2 months later. The school district said it was due to structural issues, but I know better. Some places hold on to too much darkness to ever be truly clean again. They built a new elementary school across town, bright and modern and full of windows that let in plenty of light. I hope those phantom children found their peace when the old building came down. I hope they're finally free to move on from the place that held their secrets for so long. But if you find yourself working alone in the dark and you start seeing things that can't be there, don't dismiss them as imagination. Those glimpses in your peripheral vision might be trying to tell you something important. And trust me, you want to listen before it's too late to escape becoming just another mystery that future night guards will have to face. If you're ready to hear more stories that will make you question what lurks in the darkness when you think you're alone, you know where to find them.